Isso. Sim. Yes. Yeah, it's working. So for the okay, everything's working now.
Nice meeting you. Giovanni, very nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you. I think we're really similar meetings during COVID, talked about animation. Carbon. Yeah. Then I went, what is I know you have seen COVID, I used to be guessing. We need to meet out there. I'm still sports. For lunch. To talk more because I'm keen on Savannah elephants. That's what we should. But I think we spend time on forest exactly. So my remarks will be so we want that potential. We want the metrics now, quantification. Wow. That's music to my ears. And I can put you in touch with the scientists who are doing it. Okay, fantastic. And they will be delighted. No, I'm not to be back because we are doing it. So that was the end. Yeah. So I'll be saying so that is kind of crazy. That's why.
Are we ready to go? Yep. These guys ready to go? And it's 13 channels, 13 channels and 2 million people.
Later on, also we are going to make a
Recording.
recording, and we are going to put the CPLP televisions. Okay.
And that's
So for now, we are going to only broadcast for the YouTube channel of the Ministry of the Environment in Angola. So right now we are broadcasting for the YouTube channel.
Yes.
Afterwards, we are going to make some conversation with you.
About where to send it.
Yes.
Okay. And that's the 13 channels that you shared
Yes.
yesterday. Perfect.
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you so
So I
much.
can say it's going to be later shared across 13 channels. Okay.
For the primary in Angola.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, team, you ready to go? Morning, all. If you can grab a seat, we'll get started. Great, thank you, and a very warm welcome to you all this morning to our event on exploring the nexus between wildlife crime and climate change. And a very big thank you to you, Secretary of State, and to the Government of Angola for hosting us today, and to all of our co-sponsors. We have the Global Initiative at Wildlife Crime, the Elephant Protection Initiative Foundation, ICCF Group, and we have a representative here from the ICCF Group, and the Halo Trust. I should let you know we are being broadcast live via a YouTube channel of the Hora de Agir, that's Time to Act, and they will be later sharing that video across the 13 channels in their network. So a very warm welcome to you, and thanks for broadcasting us today. We have a wonderful lineup of speakers today. It's going to be broken into 2 parts. In the first part, we're going to have senior figures coming from the Government of Angola, from the African Union Commission, and from Malawi. And then we're going to have a video, and then we're going to hear from colleagues from the UN, as well as non-government sector, and one of the world's leading experts on the value of elephants. So that's all to come. Just to start off, to set the scene, we know that marine and terrestrial ecosystems are able to absorb over 50% of anthropocentric emissions from carbon. And we also know that nature-based solutions can contribute about 1/3 of the ability to mitigate climate change to meet our Paris Agreement goals by 2030. So nature has an extremely important role to play in mitigating climate change, but also in adapting. But nature is also fragile. And sadly, people choose to poach and smuggle animals, plants, fungi, and that undermines the capacity of ecosystems to do what they do, which is to absorb carbon and many other things, many other ecosystem services. So today we're going to explore this nexus, and we're going to start off with our dear friend and colleague, Her Excellency, the Honourable Paula Francisco Coelho. She is the Secretary of State of Climate and Sustainable Development for Angola. So, Secretary of State, over to you.
Thank you very much, John, and good morning to you all. Bom dia a todos e aqueles que nos acompanham online. So it's by purpose that I'll be speaking a little bit of Portuguese because my English is not so fluent. But allow me to refresh that is on behalf of Her Excellency, the Minister of Environment, that we are here today. So she allowed us to have this side event, and she recommended that we should all then have good deliveries so that we can continue the battle concerning about wildlife. And by that, allow me just to refresh, because I cannot take the data from my own mind, but to greet you all again and to say that on behalf of the government of Angola, I thank you all again. But to me particularly, it's always a pleasure to talk and discuss about these matters when we mostly thank Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime and the Elephant Protection Initiative Foundation to help us to organize this forum. I would like also to acknowledge the game ranger associations because they are on daily basis fighting on those issues on the ground. Dear delegates, I must recall you that in September 2021, Angola's President, Honorable Excellency João Lourenço, publicly called to adoption of a new global agreement against wildlife trafficking, taking form of additional protocol under the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. In this statement, the President warned that as we continue to watch Angola's wildlife to disappear, powerful criminal forces are profiting from large sums of money, preventing vital taxes and fiscal revenue from reaching rightful government sources and permanently harming our country's distinctive tourism areas. Biodiversity loss as a consequence of unchecked wildlife crime, not only poses an imminent threat to our ecosystem, our communities, and the very fabric of our national identity, it has an impact to our climate change too. We cannot divorce the issues of biodiversity loss and climate change. Our ecosystem full of diverse wildlife and the guardians of climate regulation of carbon sequestration, vital components to our resilience against escalating impacts of changing in climate. Recognizing the urgency and the complexity of this matter, Angola affirms in its commitments to address wildlife crime and its many environmental, health, security, and economic consequences. In May 2022, less than a year after President Lourenço's statements, Angola, Kenya, and Peru drafted and submitted a resolution to UN Commission on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice, inviting member states to express their views on the potential of a new global agreement to tackle wildlife trafficking. This historic resolution was adopted by the Commission by consensus and co-sponsored by 13 other member states. Early this week, a UN of Drugs and Crime released a new report compiling the views submitted by 73 states and the European Union. The report clearly shows that the strong majority of nearly 80% of responding states are either in favor of additional UNTOC protocol and preventing and combating wildlife trafficking or open for discussions. It is particularly telling that over 25% of African states are supportive of its proposal. Our irreplaceable wildlife continues to be stolen, benefiting organized criminal networks at the expenses of local and rural communities. We need a new agreement between states and on how to advance much stronger international cooperation between source, transit, and destination countries to end these highly destructive crimes. I therefore call you all for international community and a strong support for more comprehensive and legal framework to tackle those wildlife trafficking. A framework that transcends borders, strengthens enforcement mechanisms, and fosters collaborative efforts among nations. Angola seeks to be an active participant in this endeavor, recognize that our shared commitments to conservation is a pivotal and safeguarding our people and biodiversity. Dear colleagues, let us remember that choices we make today will echo through generations to come. By safeguarding our wildlife, we secure not only our ecological legacy, but also a sustainable and resilient future, not only for Angola, but for global community. I would like to thank and submit to you, and then we go to the next point. Thank you very much. Obrigado.
Thank you, Secretary of State, and thanks for the extraordinary leadership of Angola in dealing with wildlife conservation and tackling wildlife trafficking in particular. Now we're going to move to our second speaker. She will be joining us via video. I can see Alice is just getting that set up now. We're joined by Her Excellency
Excellencies.
I'll just introduce her first. Her Excellency Josefa Leonel Correa Sacco. She is the Commissioner for Rural Economy and Agriculture with the African Union Commission. Thanks, Alice.
Apologies. Just let's try this again.
Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol will be observed. Thank you, Mr. Stallone, for giving me the floor. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank the government of Angola, the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crimes, and the IPEI Foundation. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you today as the Commissioner for Agriculture, Rural Development, Blue Economy, and the Sustainable Environment. In the vast tapestry challenges we face, I wish to underscore a critical nexus that intersects the realms of environmental conservation, rural economy, and climate resilience. The intricate linkage between wildlife crime, biodiversity loss, and climate change. Our continent, renowned for its unparalleled biodiversity, faces an alarming escalation of wildlife crime. The illegal trade in wildlife not only threatens iconic and endangered species, but less known abundant species as well. This in turn unleashes a domino effect that reverberates through our ecosystem as we witness the decline of our unique flora and fauna. We must acknowledge the profound implication for the biodiversity lost. Yet, the urgency of this matter extends beyond conservation of our wildlife species. They intertwine with the broader canvas of climate change, impacting the very fabric of our agricultural system, rural economy, and the well-being of the communities. Healthy ecosystems sustained by diverse wildlife are the bedrock of climate regulations, carbon sequestration, and the resilience needed to face the challenge posed by a changing climate. In response, I call upon us to forge a unified front, recognizing that the battle against wildlife crime is inseparable from the pursuit of sustainable agriculture and climate resilience. It is a battle that requires strong international cooperation, including through a global agreement to prevent and combat wildlife trafficking, like Secretary Cole was just mentioned. A strong international legal framework will help nations from a very corner of the world to come together and exchange information more rapidly and efficiently, harmonize their national framework, agreed on a key definition and principles, mainstream biodiversity, consideration into our climate change adaptation and mitigation strategy, recognizing the interconnectedness of these challenges. We cannot work in silo. These critical challenges need to be tackled through a comprehensive cross-sectoral approach. And finally, last but not the least, community engagement. We need to foster a sense of shared responsibility among our community as they are the custodian of our lands, our wildlife, and our future. We have a responsibility to educate new generation on the value of our environment and biodiversity, as they are the very foundation of our life in this planet. In addressing wildlife crime, biodiversity loss, and climate change, we not only safeguard our natural legacy, but fortify our resilience against the impact of climate change. Impact we are already feeling today. As we decide on the path forward, let us remember that the choice we make today shapes the world for the future generations. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to listening to your discussion.
Thank you, Madam Sacco. And it's now my great pleasure to invite the Honourable Warani Chilenga. He's the chair of the Malawi Parliamentary Conservation Caucus to address us. And I think you would prefer to go to the podium or to speak from here.
Thank you so much. I think I can speak from here. Thank you so much, Secretary Ko, and thank you to the government of Angola, the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime, and the Elephant Protection Initiative Foundation for organizing this important event, which holds great importance for Malawi. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, Malawi has long been at the forefront of efforts to combat wildlife crime and wildlife trafficking, fighting against those who illegally source wildlife products from our country, as well as those who use Malawi as a significant transit and distribution hub. It's a tireless fight, but our resolve remains unshaken. As many speakers today will highlight, wildlife crime have significant long impacts on our climate, while the connection is not as direct as some other threats. Wildlife crime contributes to broader ecological and environmental disruptions, which influence climate-related dynamics. The removal of key species through wildlife trafficking is particularly damaging to ecosystems and services they provide. For this reason, in February 2020, our President of the Republic of Malawi, Dr. Lazarus Makathi Chakwera, joined the presidents of Angola, Costa Rica, and Gabon in calling for long agreement on wildlife trafficking, taking the form of an additional protocol under the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. Since then, the European Union also committed itself to promoting a similar agreement in its EU Action Plan against wildlife trafficking of November 2022. At the 31st session of the UN Commission on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice, Malawi supported the adoption of Resolution 31/1 on strengthening international legal framework for international cooperation to combat and prevent illicit trafficking in specimens of wild fauna and flora. The important resolution called for the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime to collect member states' views on possible ways to strengthen the international legal framework against wildlife trafficking, including possibility of new agreement. The results of this consultation were extremely encouraging. Earlier this week, in fact, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime released a second report, as earlier on alluded to by the Secretary from Angola, containing views of 73 member states and the European Union, showing that over half of member states recognize serious gaps in existing international legal framework and are supportive of a new global agreement against trafficking, with close to 80% either supporting a new protocol or being willing to continue the discussion. It is also worth noting that strongest expression of support of a protocol came from African states. Distinguished colleagues, 3 protocols namely exist under UN Convention against Transnational Organized Crime, dealing with the other serious forms of transnational organized crime, namely human trafficking, firearms manufacturing and trafficking, and migrant smuggling. Wildlife trafficking has sadly become one of the world's largest and most destructive criminal activities. We are firmly of the view that a 4th protocol under the UN Convention against Transnational Organized Crime is now clearly needed to both prevent and combat these crimes. In negotiating such a protocol against many other matters, state parties would finally develop and adopt a definition of wild trafficking, which would facilitate convergence of national approaches, thereby enhancing international cooperation. Such protocol would automatically trigger UN Convention against Transnational Organized Crimes General tools to cross-border cooperation without the need to make offenses punishable by 4 years imprisonment or more. Distinguished delegates, intricate web connecting wildlife crime, biodiversity loss, and climate change has become increasingly clear. Healthy ecosystems sustained by diverse wildlife play a pivotal role in regulating climate ecosystems, sequestering carbon, and mitigating impacts of a changing climate. Disruptions caused by wildlife crime have far-reaching implications, potentially undermining the very foundations of our agricultural systems, rural economies, and the well-being of our communities. It is Malawi's opinion that a new well-thought-through instrument should be negotiated to prevent and combat wildlife trafficking. We hope we can count on all of you to join us in this bold endeavor to protect our planet's precious wildlife, which will benefit the people who rely upon wildlife and their livelihoods and our global environment. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Honourable Chilenga, and thank you to Malawi for the extraordinary leadership in tackling wildlife trafficking. Now we're going to move to our second session. We're going to start off with a short video that Alice will bring up now. Thanks, Alice. And thanks to our colleagues with the ADM Capital Foundation, based out of Hong Kong, SAR, for producing that video. We're now going to move to the next session. I'm going to make some initial remarks. John Scanlon, I'm Chair of the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime and also CEO of the Elephant Protection Initiative Foundation. We work very closely with our good friends and colleagues in Angola and Malawi in relation to all of these issues. And just quickly, as you saw from that video, it's good to say a few words just about the scale, nature, and consequences of wildlife trafficking, because we have a number of reports now that are available. We have the World Wildlife Crime Reports from the UN Office of Drugs and Crime of 2016 and 2020. There'll be another one next year. We have reports of UN Environment Programme and Interpol. We have a report of the World Bank, all showing that these crimes are driven by transnational organised criminal gangs, sometimes rebel militia. They're of an industrial scale, and you saw there in the images the scale of the trafficking in relation to all manner of plants and animals. And in terms of the consequences, sometimes we think of the consequences in terms of the animal or the plant or the fungi that is found in illegal trade, but it's much more than that. The World Bank put a figure of, in terms of the contraband, if you look at all species, you know, whether they're protected under international law or not, all species that are found in illegal trade, they said the contraband's worth about $200 billion a year. But that's not the figure we want to look at. What they went on to say is that the impact of these crimes, in particular the impact on ecosystems and the ability of an ecosystem to function effectively, to mitigate climate change by sequestering carbon, etc., they put a value of $1 to $2 trillion a year is the impact of these crimes. So you can see the scale of these. Now, the UN Office of Drugs and Crime said that there are 6,000 species that are protected under international law found in illegal trade. But they went on to find there are millions of species that are not protected under international law, but rather national law, that find their way into illegal trade as well. So the scale, nature, and consequences are massive, but there is no international agreement to prevent or combat these crimes. And that's why the presidents of Angola, Malawi, Costa Rica, and Gabon have all made a call for a new international agreement to prevent and combat wildlife trafficking under the UN Convention Against Transnational Organised Crime. And colleagues have referred to the process that's gone on and the level of support there is now for advancing this discussion. But there is a direct nexus here between wildlife trafficking and climate change, because, and we're going to hear from our other speakers, that you know, the ability of ecosystems to sequester carbon, the ability of them to enable us to adapt is completely undermined by wildlife trafficking. When you strip out wild animals, plants, fungi, you undermine the functioning of the ecosystem, and that undermines the ability to sequester carbon. And we know that nature is critical to addressing climate change. So there is the nexus. We're going to move to our next speakers who are going to advance this discussion a little further. We're going to start with our good colleague who is joining us via video, Susan Lilas, who's the Executive Vice President of the ICCF Group. And here is Susan.
Good morning, honorable delegates and dear colleagues. Thank you so much for inviting me to join this much needed discussion on the link between climate and biodiversity crises. Also, thank you to our generous host, the government of Angola, for organizing this very important event together with the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime and the EPI Foundation. I am delighted to join you today to represent the ICCF Group. We're a founding steering group member of the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime. To help combat illegal wildlife trafficking, the ICCF Group is working through our network of parliamentary conservation caucuses in source, transit, and destination countries across the world to support new and strengthened legislation, and also to support judges, prosecutors, and customs officers to better enforce anti-trafficking laws. ICCF has supported the establishment of caucuses now in 24 countries. We're also a firm supporter of a new global agreement against wildlife trafficking, and we commend the leadership of Angola, Costa Rica, Gabon, and Malawi, as well as the efforts of Kenya and Peru in this initiative. I'd like to briefly explain why this is such a priority issue for ICCF. What we're currently witnessing is a level of biodiversity loss our planet has not experienced in about 65 million years. Scientists have called it a sixth mass extinction, but unlike previous extinction events caused by natural phenomena, this one is driven by human activity, including legal and illegal overexploitation. As I'm sure many speakers before me have pointed out, a 2019 IPBES report has warned us that over 1 million species are currently at risk of extinction. What I'd like to highlight is that many of these extinctions might occur within just a matter of decades, because the current extinction rates are at least tens to hundreds of times higher than the average. This is no longer a future problem for new generations to deal with. It's happening as we speak. Now, while extinctions are a somewhat natural process, the current rates of species population decline and species extinction are so high that they're threatening important ecological functions that support human life on Earth. Biodiversity, in fact, serves as a fundamental component of climate regulation, influencing carbon sequestration, regional precipitations, and weather patterns, as well as ecosystem resilience. The rich variety of plant and animal species plays a pivotal role in maintaining healthy ecosystems, ensuring that they continue to act as the natural carbon sinks we need them to be. Illicit activities such as illegal wildlife trade, illegal logging, and illegal fishing disrupt this delicate balance, contributing to the decline and extinction of countless species, including those that provide unique functional roles. If we are to effectively tackle the twin crises of biodiversity loss and climate change, wildlife trafficking is not an issue we can afford to underestimate. The current international legal framework to prevent and combat wildlife trafficking is both fragmented and insufficient, as duly highlighted by Mr. Scanlon in his earlier intervention. The time has come for the international community to show the ambition to change. Successfully tackling wildlife trafficking demands high levels of cooperation at national and at international levels. A potential new instrument, taking the form of an additional protocol to the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, would provide the necessary framework to enable this cooperation. So on behalf of the ICCF group, I'd like to again thank Angola once again for hosting this very important conversation. We very much look forward to continuing to support you. Thank you.
Thanks to Susan, and we have our good colleagues here from ICCF in the audience with us today. We're now going to move on to talk about some specific species, because we talk about the ecosystem and the role of specific species in the ecosystem in keeping them healthy and enabling them to sequester carbon. But we have probably the world's foremost expert here, and Ralph Shami, who has been doing the work on this and putting some numbers around it. So not talking in the abstract, but talking in the concrete. So Ralph has many different roles, but he is co-founder of the Blue Green Future and Rebalance Earth. And Ralph, over to you. I'll stay here. You can just having some colleagues move from the panel so they can see the PowerPoint presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, John, for the invite. Thanks to the government of Angola for hosting this event. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. What I'd like to posit here is perhaps a missing piece of the puzzle of how to combat wildlife crime by using actually the market mechanism to support all of the initiatives that I was listening to today on the policy side. Because sometimes we forget that when we change policy, implement new measures, the markets are watching and the markets react. And so the idea is, can we use the markets to reinforce the measures that are being taken on the legal side such that we change the behavior of the economic agents that are caught in the middle? So this is where I'm going with this talk. But the problem we face in markets is that markets do not have a good relationship with the living nature. Markets have a very bad relationship with the living nature, has a very good relationship with the dead nature. You sell the ivory of a poached elephant, we know what the price is. But what's the value of a living elephant? You see? If I tell you what is the value of a tree, you probably think I'm talking about the timber. But I'm actually talking what is the value of a tree that's outside, that's living for itself. Intrinsically valuable, it turns out that it actually has a financial value for us. We're not aware of. So that's where I want to go with this talk. Where do we start this conversation? We start in the science. The science is the pillar to all of this. This is work of Fabio Berzaghi in Nature Journal of 2019. He and his colleagues showed that the forest elephants in the Congo Basin, they actually increase carbon sequestration in the forest between 7 and 14%, depending on the concentration of the elephant per square kilometer. How do they do so? Turns out that elephants have also taste buds, just like us. They like to eat plants that are low in fiber. And what they leave alone are plants that are high in fiber. So they're like plants low in fiber, high in protein. And they leave alone older growth that has more carbon in it. And also through the way they walk around the forest, through the way they traipse on small shoots and they leave alone the bigger shoots, which are actually where the carbon is sequestered. So in a number of studies that he followed up with other colleagues, they showed that also forests that have lost their elephants, those same forests have lost the ability to capture carbon. So it's not about planting trees. It's about the life in the forest, as John was alluding to. It's the life of the animals and the plants and the trees and the microbes all interacting with each other, what we refer to as biodiversity. That's where the value is coming in terms of carbon sequestration. But the elephants do a lot more than that, okay? They also are great. They're referred to as forest fertilizers. They actually disperse seeds everywhere. They followed up this paper with a few other papers in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences and Nature Journal, okay? So they disperse seeds everywhere, they fertilize, and they're really forest engineers. So the science is telling us that a living elephant is incredibly valuable. That's in the world of science. Now, we are on the policy side. We are on the market side. So we're listening to a scientist telling us this. We need to hear something that we understand, which is there a dollar value attached to this? Where do you start? We start with, there's a price for carbon. Why? Because the world, when they met in 2015, the Paris Agreement, we decided to fight climate change. And we said we need to go carbon zero, carbon negative, carbon neutral by 2050. Given that, I was sitting at the IMF. I spent 25 years at the IMF. I was watching the price of carbon go from $0 to $2, $5, $10, $15. Now in the compliance market is 100. In the voluntary market, it's between 5 and 100. And I just heard that some of the large corporations are purchasing carbon from a carbon capture machine for $1,500 a ton. So carbon price is projected to increase because we are coming against the 11th hour. We can use the price of carbon to go back and calculate what are the What are the carbon services of an elephant living her life, frolicking freely in the forest, not tied to a tree, living her life for herself? It turns out we can actually do that. This is a paper that we first published with Fabio back in 2019, which basically said, if we were to look at the lifetime services of carbon sequestration alone of an elephant over her lifetime, the present value of it would be a minimum of $1.75 million. That's when the price of carbon was $20. You can imagine what it is right now, okay? So this is just from carbon sequestration service, but we know that elephants do a lot more than that. This is to counter the argument that a dead elephant, when you sell its ivory, it's $30,000 for a trophy, as a trophy, but a living elephant is worth at least $2 million. So the question is, what can you do with that number? You don't want to frustrate people by showing them these big numbers, and they say, how do we benefit from it? How do the communities that have to live with the elephants, how do we benefit from it? Turns out we can actually do so. This is a project that we had actually started in the Gabon over 3 years. We looked at the population of elephants in the Gabon at the time. From public data, we could tell that there was about 57,000, and Gabon used to have about 190,000. So if you start from the stock of 50,000 and you go back to what it used to have, about 190,000, you're talking about at least $11 billion in terms of just the flow going from the stock of 57 to 190. But the total amount is about $33 billion. $33 billion from the sale of the carbon, not the sale of the elephants. The elephants shouldn't even know that you're actually there. They're just conducting their lives. Because they're adding that carbon not on their body, in the trees. The trees are fixed, but the elephants are moving. So we can actually sell the carbon credits, or if you like, the biodiversity credits of the elephants, as long as the elephants are allowed to live their life as nature deemed them so. Okay? Now, how would you build that argument? How would you build that market? The first question, I come from the markets. First thing they're going to say, do you have dominion over these elephants? Who do they belong to? It doesn't have to belong to one country. The countries could share that, and then we can figure out a sharing rule. That's not the issue. But we have to ascertain the provenance. Who has the ownership over this? We could follow a number of methodologies. Could be legal rights. You can endow elephants with legal rights, personhood, or you can say these are assets of the states where these elephants are roaming. It doesn't really matter. It's the same thing, because for then, when you do that, then the markets say, so there's something that has value and it's an asset. Then it enters the balance sheet. It's called codification in the law. You need the law and you need the finance. Now, how would the market actually work? So who's going to buy? Who's on the buy side? It could be Microsoft, could be Google, could be any of these companies that have committed to going carbon zero, carbon negative, carbon neutral. What are they really buying? They're never buying the underlying. You never sell the wildlife. What you're selling are the services of the wildlife. From the wildlife living their lives, not even aware that what you're doing. And so let's say it's Microsoft, for the sake of this example, they would pay money for the services of whatever it is. It could be elephants, could be rhinos, could be whatever the wildlife, whatever service. In this case, let's think of it as the carbon services of the wildlife. And that money has to go to look after the wildlife in perpetuity. Because only when the wildlife is alive and well can it generate that value. And the money goes directly to the communities that are living. So now when I look at a living elephant, I can see that living elephant is generating income for me in perpetuity. So I have my environment, I have my health, I have my income, and that is the best defense against illegal behavior. Okay, so this is how the market would actually work. And we can use blockchain to make sure that the communities benefit from that money directly, and the communities are aware of who's purchasing the services of whatever it is, the wildlife services being offered. We actually now have the technology. I mean, I've been to so many conferences where now we have the sensors and the technology to be able to track where the elephants, what the elephants are doing without invasive measures. Okay, so such that the wildlife is actually living life for themselves. So what this is telling you is an intrinsic value of nature has an equivalent financial value that communities can benefit from. Now, if we're able to do all of this, what Microsoft is really purchasing is not really carbon. They're purchasing carbon, biodiversity, and they're investing in nature. And when you're investing in nature and wildlife, you're investing in the people. When you create resilience in nature, you're stabilizing people in their land. So for a company like Microsoft, they can put on their website, we are not only just investing in carbon, we are hitting SDGs 1, 3, 5, 8, 10, 13, 14, all the way up to 17. That's incredibly valuable for companies that are looking at what is their role in the new economy that values a living nature, not a dead nature. And finally, when you put it all together, what we get is the win-win paradigm. Who benefits from this? Well, whoever is selling the carbon of the wildlife, it doesn't have to be carbon, it could be biodiversity, it could be whatever, cultural credits from the activities of the wildlife. They are getting a source of income that is what we call acyclical. It does not depend on tourism, it does not depend on the business cycle. It's a way to diversify your economy. Okay? The buy side, you have to always think, what do the buy side get? This would be Microsoft. Well, they're getting the carbon credits, they're getting the biodiversity credits, they're getting the cultural credits. They're looking pretty good. They're looking pretty good to their investors, to their consumers, to their employees, and to the regulators. And who else is looking good? Well, this is about investing in nature, in a living nature. So nature is doing good, because only a living and thriving nature can produce these benefits. So nature is a winner. And when nature is a winner, communities also are benefiting. There are no losers in this proposition. Everybody is a winner. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph, for that inspired presentation and reminding us that when nature is the winner, we're all the winner, and for looking at the value of living nature, why it's so important, not only for climate, but from multiple perspectives. We're going to move to our next speaker, Giovanni Broussard. Giovanni is a good friend and colleague of ours from the UN Office of Drugs and Crime, which has been very active at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh and COP28 here in Dubai in looking at crimes that affect the environment and climate change. And Giovanni is the African coordinator with the UNODC Global Program on Crimes that Affect the Environment. So we couldn't have anyone better with us today to talk about UNODC and wildlife crime and climate.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John, and thank you to the government of Angola for organizing this event. It's so important to be able to talk about this event here at COP28. We yesterday opened a booth with the name of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. I was there for a few hours. You have no idea how many people came to the booth to ask, what are you doing here? Why are you here? You are the Office on Drugs and Crime. What's your role in climate discussions? And that's very much part of the problem, in my opinion. Here, the whole issue of environmental crimes is very often overlooked. We are really talking about trying to achieve ambitious climate goals, but we don't really talk much about what undermines any activity to actually achieve those goals. Can a country that is devastated by illegal logging, deforestation, illegal fishing, or the burning of waste and plastic, or wildlife crime, can such a country actually realistically achieve any climate goal? we know well that when we cut forests, we reduce the capacity of sequestrate carbon emissions. When we burn waste, we increase the carbon emission in the air. When we destabilize an ecosystem, like we've heard before, whether it is a marine ecosystem or a terrestrial ecosystem, we reduce the capacity of that ecosystem to sequestrate carbon. And the case in point is the one of elephants. So it is incredibly important to address the environmental crimes before we can even talk about climate ambitions. Because these illegal activities perpetrated in industrial scale by organized groups that operate transnationally, those activities undermine every climate ambition. But when we are actually here making the final statement, making the resolution, you will notice that the word crime never appears in these final documents. Never. It's unbelievable. At best, we talk about prevention. But we're really overlooking completely a factor that will prevent every country from achieving its own goals. In the field of criminal justice, where I work on most recently, we have seen some changes also to the role of countries like Angola and to the role of Mrs. Scanlon. We really noticed that now in the discussions of the intergovernmental bodies that discuss crime and crime prevention, there is more and more a discussion about environment, about wildlife specifically, but more recently about environment in general. And everybody feels that it's important to start bringing police officers, prosecutors, judges, criminal judges to understand better the issue of environment, because it's not only an environmental matter, it's a security matter, it's an issue of rule of law. And we see that there has been some progress in that community. In the environmental community, I still see some reluctance to talk about crime. And you know, environmental crime is a topic that falls really through the cracks of two sectors, justice and environment. And the environmental sector still has a little bit of reluctance. Here is epitomized by the fact that, as I said before, the word crime doesn't feature anywhere. There is this side event and a few other side events that try to talk about this issue, but otherwise, less than 1% of the discussion here, well, less than 0.1% of the discussions here is focused on crime. With these premises, it will be very difficult to really achieve the goals that we are all aiming at. There is a need of building that bridge between the two communities, the community of criminal justice and the community of environment. I'm often told that we don't want to criminalize the villager, the farmer that actually goes to the forest and kills an animal to provide for the family, or take some plants to provide for the family. And that's exactly what we are advocating for. We need to have legal framework laws that explain very well the offenses, the small offenses and the big offenses. Laws that go very light on the small offenses and go very heavy on the big offenses. Laws that don't put in jail a small-scale offender, but laws that actually prevent impunity for the big-scale offenders. And there are a lot of offenders that, as I said, I'm not even talking now only about wildlife crime. I'm talking about waste management, illegal fishing, deforestation. These are all sectors that are part of the economy where the offenders very often are entities with licenses and permits and papers that operates through collusion with government officials. Corruption is a fundamental factor in environmental crime. And these are very often those that produce the biggest damage on nature, on climate, and on security, and on the society as a result. So But very often we have legal frameworks at domestic level that are very confusing. They have very poor definitions. There's no explanation of what are the aggravating circumstances that a judge should look at when deciding what the sentences are. We can't live anymore in a place where a small-scale courier of a few kilos of ivory go to jail for life, whereas an industrial polluter of industrial scale walks away without paying anything, without even going to court. So very often at domestic level, we see a massive mismatch between the gravity of the offenses and the sentences that we see in court. And that is translated very often also at the international level, where there is also a lack of definitions, a lack of understanding of what are environmental crimes. I'm not certainly the expert on CITES, the Convention on International Trade and Endangered Species. In this room, there is one expert that is there, and he's the one that for many years has been saying, guys, this is a convention on trade, it's not a convention on crime. It was designed to regulate the exchange of wildlife across countries, but it doesn't have the tools to actually combat crime. And COP after COP, there have been trying to develop more resolutions, more ad hoc tools to fill those original gaps in the convention. And we see in other sectors, whether it is for the management of waste, the Basel Convention, that now says, it defines crimes at international level, but it's very difficult to translate that convention into national legislation, because also that instrument, the Basel Convention, similarly to CITES, doesn't automatically translate and doesn't represent a national legislation by the sheer fact that you ratify those conventions. So there are really a lot of gap in the international legal framework, a lack of definitions that countries can use for their own domestic legislation. And that, again, it goes across different sectors. I think there is a need to start taking this issue of environmental crime incredibly more seriously. And it has to happen in these events, not so much at the Crime Commission. It's great that it started from there. It's incredible that now judges, prosecutors, and police officers and customs authorities start understanding the issue of environmental crime. It's not possible, and it's very difficult to understand why environmental regulators don't take it equally seriously, why environmental regulators don't say, look, we don't have the power, the authorities, and the training to address organized crime in the environment sector. We need the help of law enforcement agencies. That still doesn't happen. And we are working in a lot of countries in Africa, including Angola, including Malawi, Kenya, many others, to try to change that, to try to build that bridge between different communities. It's more difficult than you think. And it's not only a problem of Africa. I lived for 15 years in Asia. I was trying to do the same thing. It was equally difficult there. But it's the same in Europe, in Northern America. In every part of the world, that connection between sectors is incredibly difficult to make. So I really enjoy the fact that you took the initiative of organizing such an event here, because we need this voice. We need this voice to be heard in this kind of event. I hope you'll do so at the next COP. I hope you'll do so at the UNEA, and all the other environmental critical events where these issues have to be brought up, because if we don't do that, we won't be able to achieve any climate ambition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Giovanni, and we couldn't have had anyone better to make the case there about the importance of bringing these issues to these COPs. And congratulations to UNODC and your Executive Director, Gado Ali, for bringing it to COP27, to COP28, and showing the leadership. And you know we're with you. And once again to Angola, thanks very much for leading the charge here and having us here in this pavilion. Now we're going to move to our next good friend and colleague, Jimmy Elmandima. He is the Vice President of Global Programs with I4.
Thanks, John. Morning, colleagues. And I want to start by acknowledging the government of Angola. And it's good to have this conversation at this conference because often we love to be in our silos and talk climate separately from nature. So the International Fund for Animal Welfare is proud to be part of the global initiative to end wildlife crime. Very fitting because our belief as an organization is to ensure that animals and people thrive together. And for that to happen, we need to secure healthy ecosystems that serve as the critical habitats for the very wildlife species we're talking about. We have, over the last 20 years, seen a serious decimation and deformation of these critical habitats by, unfortunately, syndicates that in fact don't even live and own this resource in terms of coexistence. But people just have an appetite to make money by stealing from the countries in Africa and anywhere else that are endowed with rich biodiversity. And I4 says, as one of the other players, we cannot let this happen. For a long time, we were looking at this separately, species, individual animals, but what does it mean for climate, which is what we are talking about today? Ralph just clearly articulated the science behind why the iconic species, elephants, whales, anything you think about, are key to what becomes a healthy ecosystems. We always say without savanna elephants, there would be no savannas. So when we think about the carbon from trees, from grasses, from the soil, that would not be there if the gardeners, as Ralph said, of these ecosystems are not there. So that would be a missed opportunity. It's very clear that if we continue to allow the stealing of this resource through wildlife crime by these syndicates, we are losing an opportunity as Africa, as a global community, of a solution, a nature-based solution for climate action. And that is why I4 and other like-minded nature NGOs are in this scope, because we realize it's a missing link. But we do this with the leadership of the parties to the conference. Our work across 40 countries in the world is based on invitations by the respective governments, the local communities, other civil society players, as well as the private sector partners, because it's partnerships. We don't want to do it alone. There's plenty of work and we need all hands on deck. Let me hasten to go back to the crime issue, what I4 does. We, like other players, look at the entire chain from doing the law enforcement to stop poaching in the places we work on the ground. And on that element, we are really prioritizing seriously ranger welfare. We are part of the International Ranger Federation. And for many years, if you go out in these landscapes, the conditions under which the men and women that are sacrificing their time and lives on pretty low salaries, but because of their passion, are pitiful. Accommodation, uniforms, rations, transportations, access roads, and I4 prioritizes that. The trafficking piece of it, working with the interagency coordination at those exit ports, air and sea ports. Giovanni just talked about that. How do we foster the willingness of the various law enforcement agencies to talk to each other? Because if they don't do that, there's leakage. The last but not least, behavior-centered design. What are those behaviors that force those in the market to buy these illicit products? And luckily, because we all work together, there's been a change in the right direction for people saying, no, if this stealing is happening, we won't be part of that. So we're in a good trajectory, but we don't want to mistake progress for success. We still on the journey. Now, IFO is chosen to prioritize securing safe spaces for the African savanna elephants as part of an initiative we call Room to Roam, which is essentially saying savanna elephants in East and Southern Africa can move. They have no passports. And luckily, the governments, as part of the African Union and also regional economic communities, have agreed to work together to be able to share and secure the shared resource. So elephants in the trans-frontier conservation areas championed by SADC would move from Zimbabwe into Botswana to Angola, the headwaters. So thank you, Angola, for securing the headwaters. That sustained the entire system. And the same happens across all the various countries in Southern Africa and also in East Africa. So Room to Roam for IFO, we are working in northwestern Zimbabwe as part of the Kaza, Kavango, Zambezi Trans-Frontier Conservation Area. We are working in central Malawi, Honorable, in Kasungu National Park, transboundary to eastern Zambia as part of the Luangwa class of elephants. And we are working in southern Kenya, the southern ranges around Amboseli National Park into northern Tanzania. But elephants don't stick into national parks. Our national parks are like broken plates. They are isolated, surrounded by a sea of human activities. Now, we need both. So the idea is for wildlife to thrive with people, and that requires partnerships very solid between the political will and the leadership of governments, the local communities. We have started structuring a network of traditional leaders from the chiefs around where we work. And we call those anchor landscapes, but we're counting on the willingness of all other similar players to see the vision for Room to Roam to succeed. For a couple of reasons, the climate piece is given, the numbers are there. They always say data is currency, so thanks, Ralph. I hope we all see the business case for it. But more importantly, climate is real. And we are clear from the scenario models that some areas are going to be drier. Yet there's suitable habitats for elephants as flagship species, but when you talk of elephants, all other species also follow through. So how do we proactively identify those suitable habitats before they are converted to something else that will make them unable to serve as suitable habitats? And if we negotiate with landowners, state parties, local communities, and private sector, we secure them. So if for any reason there is water scarcity, as we see now with more recurrent extreme weather events, droughts, floods, etc., elephants will pave the way and others follow, so we don't lose our elephants. So we are able to make sure the utilization of the entirety of the home range of savanna elephants is taken advantage of. But if we don't do that, the safe passages, the safe dispersal areas are going to be blocked, and you cannot rebuild that suitable habitats once it's gone. So part of the discussions IFO is doing, not alone, but with all of you in this room, is to simply say, these systems are connected. And I'll kind of end by saying, we grew up in school saying the balance of nature. Now, if we are stealing through wildlife crime for short-term benefits, if you are chasing some of the non-renewable resources that are sitting in suitable habitats, once they are exhausted, we can't get that back. But we can have it both, win-win. We can strategically plan in a participatory way with free, prior informed consent with the custodians and say this zone is critical for elephants and wildlife, and that's how we get the healthy ecosystems. We can do some of our extractive somewhere else where it's suitable. We can settle in one central place. In the process, you minimize the conflict that persists. And when you minimize that, people feel proud, you empower them, they are part of the movement. Then last but not least, funding for what we do and for what would enable us to secure wildlife resources. The budget is estimated 700 billion, but now we are simply getting nothing, almost. And the money for climate is going to other parts of the climate move, action, and forgetting the nature. Yet this is a low-hanging fruit All we need to do is to invest in it and make it save us for climate action. Technology to capture carbon, yes, can come. It costs a lot of money. We are ignoring this low-hanging fruit. So Room to Roam is an initiative we are really excited about. It's very ambitious. It's not going to be a highway, but it allows us to extend the landscapes, the transboundary initiatives that are already in place, with like-minded participants, governments, communities, private sector, because healthy ecosystems, wildlife species that are viable are good for business and are good for our health. So I thank you and just want to say, again, this is a conversation that has come late, but better late than never. And you can count IFO to be one of those voices and players on the ground, partnering and building capacity for the agencies with the mandate in the countries and the communities, community science, citizen science, stewards for the future. So looking forward to the discussion and certainly good to be here.
Thanks, Jimmy, for those very passionate remarks. And I think you connected all of the interventions we've heard previously in your comments. We have one more speaker with us today, joining us via video recording. It's Chris Watley. He is the Executive Director of the Halo Trust in the US. Alice?
Hi, I'm Chris Watley. I'm Executive Director of the Halo Trust USA, and I want to thank you for this opportunity to join you virtually in the Angolan Pavilion, and just say what an honor it is to be able to speak on a panel with such an amazing group of environmental leaders. And I work for an organization that clears landmines, that deals with the consequences of conflict. And really, I'm just here to cover two very short points. First, I want to talk a bit about the implications of conflict in the world today, very briefly, and then talk to you about a specific example of hope. Now, on the bad news side, 2021 was already a bad year for conflict. In the year of 2021, 120,000 people died as a result of armed conflict. But that shoots up by almost 100% just 1 year later. 2022, 237,000 people died as a result of armed conflict. I don't think that's a surprise. We're probably all thinking about Ukraine, but you also had Myanmar, Ethiopia, other areas of the world suffering from conflict. And as we know, conflict is a driver not only of human suffering, but of poaching, of deforestation, of things that have direct implications for wildlife crime, for climate. But that's where the hopeful side comes in. Although we're dealing with conflict as a rising tide in the world today, and therefore it is a rising threat to climate and to biodiversity, there are examples we can pull from of success, of countries who, through their own bold leadership, are addressing these very same drivers of climate threats and biodiversity. And Angola is the perfect example of that. Angola is a place that was torn apart by conflict for decades, a conflict that only ended in 2002, but left vast minefields to be addressed that have driven human suffering, that have driven poverty, that in turn have driven poaching and deforestation, that threaten the very issues this panel is designed to address. But through the bold leadership of the Angolan government, its commitment to demine those very same minefields in southeast Angola that have threatened those populations and that threaten the amazing biodiversity of the source waters of the Okavango Delta, we are now seeing a vast new possibility. The Halo Trust is honored to work with the Angolan government to clear those minefields, is currently working with environmental partners like EPI, like National Geographic, to do the science necessary to support the science, in our case, to help address those very drivers of climate fragility, of wildlife crime. And for me, in a time where you're seeing these rising tides of conflicts in so many parts of the world, it is a blessing to be able to see bold leadership from a government like Angola, great partnerships from corporate partners, philanthropic partners, and environmental partners all coming together and giving us an example of hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Chris. That has brought our panel of speakers to a close, but we do have some time if anyone would like to throw any questions to the panel or make any observations or...
Thanks very much. Good morning to everyone. Thanks Angola for organizing such a side event of a vital importance. Hearing all of you, congratulations for the presentation. By the way, I had so many questions, but by your last slide, I'm now clear. But I still have a few questions. Many to Shan. You said that your voice is not being hearing in all these COPs. A wildlife crime is not in the central of the COPs agenda. We know that biodiversity is recognized as vital in terms of climate, regulation. It's well recognized that most of the cases these wildlife crime are transnational. So my question is, what then you people who deal with this issue are doing so that your voice is also hearing in these such of events like COPs? And you mentioned also that there is the member of parliament from Malawi, that there is serious gaps in terms of the international framework. But we know that all size might not fit all. Is this enough to have these international frameworks? What at the national level maybe the country should do in order to, at least to minimize? Because these wildlife crime are committed not by simple people, not the rural people. And we know that you mentioned big companies. So we all know what's happened. Where is the solution? What do we have to do? Thank you.
So if the question is, what are we doing to elevate this topic and attract a little bit more attention? Probably we're not doing enough. We're doing what we can with the limited resources that we have. But at the end of the day, even UN agencies are not supra-governmental entities. We serve government. We assist governments in implementing their decisions, but the decisions have to come from governments. So we have a limited capacity to really make the changes that probably are necessary unless there is a majority of governments that decide to influence these massive multilateral intergovernmental processes. So we try what we can, which certainly is limited. For instance, we are not even supposed to be an active part on discussions like protocols to the UNTOC because it's a decision of governments. It's not really up to a UN agency to make decisions on what is the international legal framework that governments should be abiding to. It has to be driven by government. Once decisions are taken, then we help implementing them, and we provide a lot of technical assistance. We train judges, police officers, customs, prosecutors, environmental agencies to be more aware of these issues, to investigate them, to prosecute them. We bring countries together to address the transnational elements. When you have wildlife crime that starts in Africa and finishes in Asia, you have no idea how much reluctance there is in starting joint investigations. The African country does its part, sometimes, the Asian government does its part sometimes, and nothing happens at the international level. So these transnational groups always get away with minimal sanctions in which possibly the courier goes to jail, but the controller of the groups is never addressed. So what we try to do is we bring together investigators that will never talk to each other because they come from different continents, and we help them to actually build cases and conduct investigations and bring these cases to court at the more transnational level. We try to develop techniques like controlled deliveries, mutual legal assistance. We try to look at the financial aspect of the environmental crime, which is also extremely difficult and very often overlooked. But again, we can do that only if there is willingness from the governments to do that. That's why I'm extremely happy when I see governments like Angola, like Malawi, that are quite happy to talk about these issues, to put these issues on the table, because that political will is what we need and what allows us to operate. But when there is no political will from the government, all doors are closed and there's very little that we can do.
Thank you so much. Myself, I will briefly talk about the laws. It is very difficult that in as far as laws are concerned, one size should fit all. But I will just give an example of Malawi. In Malawi, we have tried, and in as far as some of our game reserves are concerned, we have almost restored them to their former glory. What we did in 2015 is that we changed the Wildlife Act, we revised it, and we removed all the fines in the act. In Malawi, if you commit a wildlife crime, you will not pay anything. We only introduced custodial sentences. You simply go to court and you'll be imprisoned. And the maximum sentence is up to 30 years. So as far as we are concerned in the SADC, we have done so well. But it's difficult for us to do it as a standalone because we have got neighbors, we have got Zambia, we have got Tanzania, we have got Mozambique. And there's this trafficking from one country to the other is what we are looking for, that these protocols should try to address such gaps and make sure that these laws are harmonized. Thank you.
And very quickly, my brother, I think one way is if the parties to this conference, convince the climate COP that nature is important, wildlife is important, it helps to get this taken seriously. And we have documentation clearly that the Paris target is, we are far from catching it up, but if we get to invest in wildlife, we will be closer to do that. Then one last important issue, which is a different layer, is on live animals seized in trade. There is a lot of these exotic pests being exported across borders, across regions, and we are developing governance processes and procedures on how to repatriate them to where they belong to avoid captivity or euthanasia. So that's a layer of, again, a resource through wildlife crime that is developing and growing because of people with money that want to do that. Just wanted to put that on the layer there.
Let me be a bit more provocative. In Panama, they conferred personhood on sea turtles. In Costa Rica, they conferred personhood on bees. In New Zealand, they conferred personhood on a river. They're legal person, meaning they have rights. Bees have rights, and if you were to harm them, there's legal and financial ramifications for that. Let me repeat one thing that I said before. We need to use the markets as a complement to all of these wonderful rules and regulations. We have not used the markets the right way. We've done the rules and regulations forgetting that markets can be a great help in combating crime. But markets only they don't see nature. They look at what is called assets. Right now, dead animals are assets. So therefore, they have a value. But a living nature is not viewed as an asset, it's viewed as nature. If we change that terminology, and that's what I was showing you, that the value of a living elephant, living for itself, not tied to a tree, living, frolicking freely in the forest can produce for you millions of dollars in value. If we can change that terminology from talking about nature to that natural asset, then the markets will look at you differently. And then markets always provide insurance to assets. You know, we insure our cars, we insure our houses, we insure ourselves because we are viewed either as persons or as assets. That's the language that we need to adopt. That way we co-opt the markets to be our help, to help us out in combating crime with all of these wonderful initiatives that you're seeing right here. Thank you.
Well done, Ralph. That resonated. Okay, we're going to wrap things up. I'm going to give the final word to Secretary of State, but before doing that, we are breaking new ground in exploring the nexus between wildlife crime and climate change and crimes that affect the environment more generally. But it's something we need to do because as we've heard from all of our speakers, if we don't show this nexus, recognize this nexus, we are not going to achieve our climate goals, nor are we going to achieve our biodiversity goals or our sustainable development goals. And the reason why we're going to get some traction here is because of extraordinary leadership. First and foremost, leadership of states. And we've got extraordinary leadership here from Angola and Malawi. We've seen just not today, but we've seen for some considerable time now. But we also see leadership across the board from UNODC, which is bringing this to the COPs, from I4 and other NGOs, from new and very creative initiatives like Rebalance Earth, which Ralph is co-leading there. Through this collective effort, we are going to show this nexus. Through this collective effort, we are going to bring this issue into the heart of climate change and ensure that we can end wildlife crime, protect nature, ensure that local people are benefiting, as Ralph highlighted so much. But I'm not going to go on from there because we have an extraordinary leader here, the government of Angola, represented by State Secretary Coelho, and I'd like to leave the last word to her. So, Paula, over to you.
Thank you very much, moderator. This is very tricky. But before I close, allow me also to share some views of the government of Angola. And one of the key things that we got assigned in country was the change on a penal code for the fine to be addressed to those who are committing illegal wildlife trade. There is also a gap when we talk about environmental crime and wildlife trafficking. And for our understanding as Angola, it says mostly that we need to separate them from what is it first to understand what will fall under climate change mitigation, adaptation, and then what will tackle issues of biodiversity. Because if life is done on Earth, then we need to look back at the Rio Convention principles, and then we'll have the basis to discuss further those and translate again into a national language or a national citizenship so that communities are involved. We are also facing an issue where the standing committees for CITES, till today, we are waiting to have a feedback on how to have a standing committee for communities. Because I cannot speak on behalf of a chief, I can deliver a message of a chief. This is also an issue that at the international rule of law, we should also address. And to my end, I would like also to push that please let us help the championship of President Lorenzo on that, okay? Because we all acknowledge, despite discrepancies on any topic, but we all agree if it's science, if it's communities, if it's life on Earth, if it's organizations, but it's about also people and the livelihood of the Earth, of the planet. Honorable Minister used to say that there is no planet B. So if there is no planet B, let us take care of planet A, and this is the one that we are living in. So I would like now to end by saying thank you all for those who are already in line, and also to say that we are also thinking on having and establish a national authority to combat those environmental crimes. But the environmental crimes in Angola, again, it will fall within two pillars: climate and biodiversity. So thank you very much. And for those online on different platforms, we also would like to acknowledge your presence and thank you and all those who delivered the speeches on video. And for us, a bigger round of applause. And thank you, MC, for that. And we close this event, right? Thank you very much.